Welcome to Section 3, Getting Data In. In this section, we'll talk about uploading data to Splunk, monitoring, and forwarding, both heavy and universal forwarders. This is a very important section, and it will lead us right into the next section. So let's get started. Welcome to this segment on how Splunk consumes data. We also want to answer the question, what kind of data can Splunk consume? Well, the answer is, the sky is really the limit. Some of the more obscure types of unstructured data might require some human intervention, but once you teach Splunk how to deal with that data, the next time it encounters it, it is very easy to handle it, and it knows exactly how to do so. So Splunk can consume all of the regular types of data that you would expect, and look at that Internet of Things. So we can consume data from toasters and things like that, but more importantly, self-driving cars, sensors on our bodies like fitness sensors, and all kinds of things. Of course, Splunk can consume the regular logs, configurations, scripts, tickets, alerts, virtual and physical servers, communications devices, almost anything you can throw at it. And how do we get data there? Well, we can upload files, we can monitor files, we can forward syslog data directly to a Splunk indexer or search head, we can use SNMP traps, we can use scripted inputs from APIs. Perhaps the most important way that Splunk gets data is through universal and heavy forwarders. And we'll talk about universal and heavy forwarders and install and configure them in the next two segments. But for now, let's go through uploading and monitoring. Here are our three options. We have upload, monitor, and forward. And uploading is pretty straightforward. We just upload a document. In the demo, we'll do a CSV document. Monitoring is equally as simple. We just click on monitor. The forward option allows us to see which forwarders are calling home to our Splunk indexer or search head. It also allows us to set up a Splunk distribution server. And we can also manage forwarders remotely through this forwarding panel. But that comes later in the course. We'll talk more about setting up a distributed environment. Any type of data that comes in gets assigned some default metadata by Splunk unless you specify otherwise. The metadata is source, host, source type, and index. Index defaults to default. Source type, Splunk attempts to automatically determine the source type, whether it's CSV or syslog or something like that. Host defaults to the machine name that Splunk detects. And source defaults the path of the input file. So let's see how uploading and monitoring works in Splunk. Back on our Splunk search head, I'm going to first download the homeworkdata.csv file. And back in Splunk, I'm going to go to Settings, Add Data, and first of all, I'm going to upload, select a file, and there's our homeworkdataset.csv. It should upload pretty quickly. Next, set the source type, and Splunk will automatically determine that it is a CSV. If the source type is unclear to Splunk, you can manually set it here. Make sure everything is good. This is a CSV that I created, so it's pretty clean. Now we're going to choose Input Settings. The host field value, I defaulted to my machine name, but let's manually define a host name, and we'll call it homework. And index defaults to default, and that's fine. We'll review everything and click Done. And we'll start searching, and let's make sure that our homework data was uploaded and is searchable. So here Splunk generated a search for us. Source equals that file name, host equals homework, and source type equals CSV. You don't actually need all that. You just need one of them to bring up our homework data. And here is the homework data with the fields that Splunk has automatically detected. And it lists them here as well as interesting fields. And since it's a CSV file, the fields are very clear because, as we know, a field is a key value pair. So key value, host equals homework. That's a key value pair. And Splunk did this in smart mode. We'll talk about modes a little bit later. And choose monitor. Now we need to tell Splunk what we are intending to monitor. Let's choose files and directories. And we'll browse, and as you can see, we can actually browse the file system. So let's browse down in Windows. Diagnostics might have a lot of data. And we'll monitor that entire directory, Windows Diagnostics Index. And now it's going to ask us for the same source information that we did when we uploaded a file. So host field value, let's just call it Windows. And the index is fine how it is. We'll review the data, submit it, and then start searching. And we have 24 events. This is a brand new virtual machine, so it hasn't been alive long enough to collect a ton of events. But we've just monitored this path. We've assigned it a particular host name, so all we need to do is do host equals Windows, and it will bring up the same data. And again, we're in smart mode, so Splunk is trying to detect all of the fields that might be useful to us. And remember, next up we're going to talk about forwarders, so stay tuned for that. I look forward to seeing you then. Welcome to the segment on forwarders. There are two main types of forwarders in Splunk: universal forwarders and heavy forwarders. In this segment, I'm going to focus mainly on universal forwarders, and in the next segment, we'll talk about heavy forwarders. Universal forwarders are the most popular. They're the easiest to install, and you can install them on the local machine, and they can also be configured using a deployment server if you have a distributed environment set up in Splunk. The default ports that universal forwarders talk on are 8089 for management and 9997 for indexing. Heavy forwarders are simply a complete installation of the Splunk enterprise software, but you apply a forwarder license. Heavy forwarders do much of the heavy lifting at the source, including parsing data. And heavy forwarders can be configured at the source, but are often configured through a deployment server. Forwarders will not work unless you configure receiving. I can't tell you how many times I've forgotten about configuring receiving when setting up Splunk instances. Simply go to Settings, Forwarding and Receiving, and then Add New, and we'll show you how to do this in the demo. So here is how my lab is set up. I have a Windows forwarder, an Ubuntu forwarder, and a Splunk search head. My two Windows machines are Windows 10 Enterprise. And when we go through our demo, I'll make sure to let you know which machine is which and what exactly we are doing. On the right, I have my Windows 10 Splunk search head, the one that we've been using throughout the class. On my left, I have a Windows 10 machine that will be used as a universal forwarder and then a heavy forwarder. And here in the middle, in my terminal, I have my Ubuntu machine on which we will install forwarders. So first of all, let's open up our Splunk web. And as you can see, we have no data coming in because we haven't yet forwarded any data or uploaded any data or told Splunk to monitor any data. Click on Data Summary, nothing coming in. So what we want to do is forward data to this machine. And the first thing I want to do is find out what the IP address of this machine is, since I don't have DNS set up on this virtual machine network. 172.16.182.150, and I'll just put that on the screen there. And let's configure receiving. So we'll go to Settings, Forwarding and Receiving, and under Configure Receiving, we'll choose Add New. And it says listen on this port. 9997 is the default port number, so we will go with that. You can make it whatever port, well, whatever ephemeral port you want, as long as you remember what it is. Okay, it is enabled. Now let's install a Windows Universal Forwarder on this machine. And honestly, the easiest way to find it is to search Splunk Universal Forwarder. And it's usually the first link. And we'll choose the forwarder that's right for our operating system. In this case, it's Windows, but as you can see, we have all these other options here. So I'm going to download the 64-bit MSI installer, and it will make me log in with my Splunk account. We'll save the downloaded file. And just to show you where it is, it will probably be in your downloads folder, and there it is. Go ahead and run the installer. Of course, you have to accept the license agreement. Now, I like to choose this customize options, and I'll show you why. I don't really care where a forwarder installs. I don't really care right now about SSL stuff. We can leave the local system to run the forwarder service for right now. And here is why I like to customize options, because I want to make sure that all of these boxes are ticked, and if you don't have a need for some of these items, then you should not tick the box, because then you're just creating pollution and noise. And here's where we type in the IP address of our Splunk, in this case our Splunk search head. If we have a distributed environment, the Splunk indexer. And it was 172, and the port for deployment is 8089, and this is going to be the same, but the port number will be 9997. And we'll proceed with the installation. On some versions of Windows 10 or Windows Server 2012 or 2016, I have seen a Universal Forwarder install hang at this point. If that happens to you, the workaround that I've found is to use Task Manager to stop Windows Installer, reboot the Windows machine, run the installer again, but this time leave the deployment server and the forwarding server information blank. Then the installer will run, but the settings that you put in the first time you ran the installer will persist. And we can verify that our settings are correct by looking at the config files. So we'll browse the file system, go to C, Program Files, Splunk Universal Forwarder, etc, System, Local, and we're interested in this outputs.conf file, and I just opened it with Notepad, and here we are. We have the correct server and the correct port. So that's all we're really concerned with. And let's make sure that our Universal Forwarder service is running by going to services.msc, and we'll scroll down until we get to Splunk. And it is running. Let's go back to our Splunk search head, and let's see if we are getting any data now. Search and reporting app, and it still says waiting for data. If we click on data summary, we don't have any data coming in. The first thing we want to check for troubleshooting is that those two ports are open on the Windows firewall. So click on Start and search for Windows Firewall. And the first thing we can do is simply turn it off. If this is not a production environment, this is fine to do. If it is a production environment, I recommend you skip this step. And we definitely aren't going to leave it off. I just want to see if we can make some data come in. I'll refresh the search head. And now we have 6 events. The earliest event was a month ago. The latest event was 10 minutes ago. Let's see where our data is coming from. and it's coming from the machine called desktop-360am4d. So let's see if that's our machine here. Okay, great. Yes, it is. So we do have data coming in from our Universal Forwarder on Windows. Let's now install a Universal Forwarder on our Linux machine. The first thing I'm going to do is search for Splunk Universal Forwarder again. And this time I'm going to choose the Linux version. And again, you can choose whichever file type you like to work with and that works with your flavor of Linux. I like the tarball, so I'm going to click on Download Now. And I'm going to cancel the download because all I want is this command line wget string. Click here to select the entire command. I'm going to simply copy that and then type in Ubuntu sudo paste the wget string, and it will download the Splunk Universal Forwarder. Let's make sure that happened. There it is. Let's now copy that to opt. That's where Splunk likes to live. And there it is in opt. Now let's untar it. And it created this directory called Splunk Forwarder, so let's browse to that. And there are our traditional Splunk directories. And once we have the Splunk Forwarder untarred like this, we want to enable boot start. So whenever this Ubuntu machine reboots, we want to have the Splunk Forwarder daemon start automatically. So let's go to the bin directory. And in the bin directory, we'll simply type sudo splunk enable boot start. And Ubuntu, we have to do // which I forgot. And if you do not do the -- accept - license switch, you have to scroll through this huge end user license agreement. But of course, I have the magic of video editing, so I will just skip this part. And finally, accept the license agreement. And now, still in the bin directory, we want to do sudo //splunk. We're going to add the address of the Splunk search head. We'll simply say add forward server and our IP address of the server with the default port number. And we'll see if it actually accepted that. Sudo splunk list forward server. And there it is. It is configured but inactive because in Linux we have to explicitly tell it which data to monitor and send on to the Splunk search head. And to do that, we use the command Splunk add monitor, and then the path to the directory or file that you want Splunk to monitor and send on to the Splunk search head. So I'm just going to do, for right now, var log, and we'll see if the forward server now became active. And no, it is not active yet because we have to restart the Splunk service. Now we'll list the forward servers. And look at that, it is an active forward server now. And let's go to our search head and see if that data is coming in. So we'll go back home. Searching and reporting. A few seconds ago for the latest event, that's good news. Let's click on Data Summary. And now we have all of this extra stuff from Ubuntu Server, syslogd, UTC, and 2016. And remember, as part of our troubleshooting, we turned the firewall off on this machine. So let's turn it back on, but let's make sure we have the appropriate ports open. We'll search for firewall, go to Advanced Settings, go to Inbound Rules, and we'll click on New Rule, and we'll choose Port, and we'll leave that on TCP. Does anybody remember the 2 Splunk ports that we need to open here? Good job, 9997, 8089. Next, allow all the networks. We'll call it Splunk. There it is. And let's make sure our firewall is on. Okay, everything's on. And let's refresh the search head. And we have data coming in from a few seconds ago. And it's all there, just as we expect. In this module, we successfully installed a universal forwarder on Windows and Linux. I really thank you for joining me in this segment and for following along, and I'll see you in the next segment when we install heavy forwarders. Welcome to our segment on heavy forwarders. In the previous segment, we talked about light forwarders. Now we want to talk about heavy forwarders. And why are heavy forwarders important? Because we can do heavy lifting at the source. We can index and parse data, we can load balance, and we can define specific data routing rules. You can clearly see how this could be extremely useful in a highly distributed environment. Do not be turned off by the terminology of a heavy forwarder. It's really just a regular installation of Splunk, the same installation you would use for an indexer or search head. The only difference is once you're done installing it, you go to Settings, Licensing, Change License Group, and you click that radio button that says Forwarder License. Once you install a heavy forwarder, it's pretty easy to set up. You just simply go to Settings, Forwarding and Receiving, and Add New under Forward Data. Once you click Add New, you'll come to this screen where it asks for either a DNS name or an IP plus a port of the indexer or search head to which you want to forward. If you want Splunk to automatically load balance the data to multiple indexers, you can simply list multiple indexers here, separated by commas. You can also save a copy of the data locally. If you go to Forwarding Defaults, it will ask you if you want to store a local copy of the forwarded events. You can choose yes or no there. You can probably think of some use cases in which you would want to store a local copy of the events and some in which you would not. If this particular machine is pretty lightweight and doesn't have a lot of storage, you may not want to store a copy of forwarded events on the machine locally. So let's talk about some basic differences between universal and heavy forwarders. Universal forwarders, remember, are the light agent. There's event parsing available at the source in some cases, but no event routing available on universal forwarders. Heavy forwarders are a full Splunk enterprise installation, and we can parse and route data at the source with heavy forwarders. Let's take a look at how to install and configure a heavy forwarder in a Windows and a Linux environment. And by the way, when we do the Windows environment, the reason I'm not doing Mac environments is because it's exactly the same as the Windows environment, except you'll download a DMG file instead of an MSI file. As always, we have our 3 stars of the show here. We have our Splunk search head, our Windows Splunk forwarder, and in the terminal, we have our Ubuntu server that we can set up as a forwarder. So first of all, let's log into our search head. I've actually uninstalled the light forwarders on these other machines, so there won't be data coming in until we actually install the heavy forwarders. So for fun, let's start with Linux. And again, we want to open a browser on any machine and get that wget string, just like we did to install Splunk Enterprise in the first place. So we'll simply go to splunk.com. Click on the free Splunk button. Choose Splunk Enterprise. And we're going to choose Linux. And again, I like to use the TGZ. I'm going to click download now, but remember I'm not actually downloading it. Of course it's going to make us log in, and we'll cancel the download because we just want this wget string. Click here to select the entire string. And once again, we will make sure it's there. There's our old forwarder tarball that we downloaded. And there's our Splunk Enterprise instance that we just barely downloaded that does not have the word forwarder in it. So let's copy that again to opt. And remember, on Linux, that's where Splunk likes to live. So sudo cp, and then we'll navigate to opt. Make sure it's there, and it is. And then we'll simply untar it. Alright, it created that Splunk directory for us. And remember, we're going to go to bin, and we're going to tell Splunk to start. And to do that, we'll simply go sudo Splunk start, and let's do the -- accept license switch so that we don't have to read that horribly long end user license agreement. Now it says the Splunk web interface is available here. However, I don't have DNS set up, so we will have to access it by the IP address. So let's see what that is. And it's 172.16.182.142. Let me bring up a browser. And there it is. Let's log in for the first time. Admin and change me. Change the password. Skip all of this. Now remember, the first thing we do on a heavy forwarder is go to Settings, Licensing, Change License Group, Forwarder License, Save. And it'll make us restart the Splunk server, that's fine. Log in again. Now we want to go to Settings, Forwarding and Receiving, Configure Forwarding, Add New. Our host machine is, let's check the IP, 172.16.182.150. And 999.7. Okay, everything's enabled, looks good. Now, no data is being forwarded on this heavy forwarder yet, because we have to explicitly monitor or upload a file or in some way add data to this forwarder. So let's click on Add Data, and let's choose Monitor. And let's say there's a specific directory on this Linux machine that we want to monitor and then forward on to our search head. So Files and Directory, let's browse. As you notice, this is now a Linux file system. And let's do the same thing we did with our universal forwarder. Let's go to var, and we'll just monitor that whole directory. And the host, let's make the host metadata value Ubuntu heavy so that we can identify it more easily in our search head. Review, done. And let's add one more directory just to make sure, just in case there is nothing actually in that var directory. So monitor, files and directories, and let's monitor this sys and kernel directory. That could be important, and it could also have a lot of data which we're interested in. Click Next. Let's do Ubuntu Server Heavy and Sys. And notice something here. When we try to search directly on a heavy forwarder, we get all of these licensing errors. Because remember, on a heavy forwarder with a forwarding license, you cannot search. You have to use the Splunk search header indexer to which it is forwarding. So let's go back to our Splunk search head. Let's refresh it. And latest event now. This is good news. Click on Data Summary. There it is, Ubuntu Heavy and Ubuntu Heavy Sys. And Sys, oh, this one has a lot more data. Awesome. Okay, so now let's put that away for just a minute, and we'll install a heavy forwarder on our Windows machine. Again, we're just going to go to Splunk.com. Click on the green Free Splunk button. Download Splunk Enterprise. And for this, we want the MSI. It'll make us log in, of course. And we'll save that. And we'll simply go to our Downloads folder. And there it is. We'll run the installer. Okay, once it's done installing, we'll leave that box ticked, launch browser with Splunk Enterprise. And since the rest of this is going to be pretty much exactly like the Linux installation and setup, I'm going to speed up the process, and I'm going to put the steps I'm going through on the left side of your screen there. So first step is add the forwarding license. Restart. Log in again. And set up forwarding in the exact same way. And monitor or upload some data. And we're finished installing a heavy forwarder on Linux and on Windows. And just to reiterate, installing a heavy forwarder on Mac is essentially the same as installing a heavy forwarder on Windows. I really appreciate you joining me in this segment, and I'm really excited to see you in the next segment.